Yeah, let's start with doing all that. You guys know me. I'm the Night Sky Prince. Sleepezi. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? By the way, this is Sleepezi, as you can see me pointing. and yes, but go ahead.
I am Sleepezi. I have a channel on YouTube dedicated to just theorycrafting Final Fantasy VII Remake, and I just finished a 5-part series of theorycrafting videos, at all which are cataloged on the channel and are about an hour to 2 hour long theories each. Just really glad to be here. So.
Okay. And BabySeal, why don't you tell us about yourself?
So I'm my name's Clark. We'll just get that out of the way. Schrodinger's BabySeal is my channel name. I generally do Twitch streaming, but I'm a deep lore guy. All of my Twitch streams have been have involved like inane nonsense, like wandering around Midgar, counting graffiti, finding bizarre Easter eggs. I've cataloged every type of butterfly that appears outside of Aerith's house, just looking for that deep lore stuff. I have a mythology background and a philosophy background, so a lot of the context for all Final Fantasies, but in particular Final Fantasy VII, I have a college level education in, and have taught various courses on subjects such as Etruscan mythology, and you might recognize Etruscan mythology as the first source of our beloved Minerva, who is, if you didn't know, the most important character in all of the compilation, according to Sleepezi. And Kabbalah, which Kabbalah is a heavy theme throughout Final Fantasy VII. Sephiroth gets its name from the Kabbalah. There's a bunch of Abrahamic religion references to everything involving Jenova and Sephiroth and stuff like that. And so I have a great background in some of the stuff that loosely feeds the world behind Final Fantasy VII. And so I talk about that a lot in my streams. So fluent in Latin and Greek. And so I have formed a friendship with Sleepezi, who utilizes those skills regularly.
Clark has been a massive help for especially this last video, as well as Otto, who's in the chat. A lot of that information.
And you should have on your show next, in my humble opinion.
Oh, wow. Well, yeah, I'll definitely add them to the list. All right, you guys are more than qualified for today's discussion. We've actually been talking about this for the past few weeks. It's something that I've really wanted to do, primarily because I've been watching your videos, Sleepezi, and there. I just want to say, if you guys, if you are just one of my subscribers, please go check out his channel. If you're watching this on YouTube later, there's going to be a link in the description below. But this dude makes some really just ultra compelling fan theory videos, some of the best that I've ever watched, just across the board for any series. So just he definitely needs that shout out. Because he's doing a fantastic job, and so I was really excited. First of all, when I saw that Sleepezi was even in my Twitch stream before, I was like, oh hey, yeah, I know that dude, I know his videos, and so I was like, I gotta have him on here because we have to sort of talk about this sort of stuff. And I really, thinking about it, there was no one almost more qualified to talk about this than you, because you have put in. To say that this guy has put in research is an understatement. I'm talking about 5-part series. Some of the series, each episode is either an hour to 2 hours long, and there's no filler. The dude just loads it with just information back to back to back to back to back to back, and it's all really good, really solid stuff that just makes sense. So it's really powerful stuff, and I'm glad to have you on here. If I can first, just either one of you, if you have a good way of explaining for those of you who maybe have not seen your theories or haven't read up on them or know about anything that you do. And I know this is kind of hard to explain because I'm basically asking you to condense like what is it, like almost 10 hours of like content?
It's like 8 hours.
Yeah. Something like that, into something that can be like digested by the audience over the course of this stream. But can you in some way give us a TLDR just for those in the chat and those watching here on YouTube, what your general thesis about the direction of Remake is going?
What's going on?
Yeah. It's what we all want to know.
So just to put it into context, I know that a lot of people who've played Remake were sort of left with a lot of outstanding questions as to like what the whispers are, like what might their function be in the grander scheme of the story, or were they just something sort of inserted into Final Fantasy VII story through Remake. A lot of what the video, or like what Sephiroth is doing, like why is he just showing up in Final Fantasy VII Remake? All of these like bigger questions, like Whisper Harbinger, all these characters or moments that are confusing and not a part of the original, showing up. The 8 hours that I spent in the video series that I just finished, really is trying to just go into every single outstanding moment from Remake and put it into the context of, well, how does this make sense from a lore perspective coming from the compilation of Final Fantasy VII? And for those who don't know the scope of that, it's Final Fantasy VII, Advent Children, On the Way to a Smile, which is a pre-Advent Children book. And then you have Crisis Core and Dirge of Cerberus, and a mobile game that a lot of people haven't heard of, which is Before Crisis. I think most people are pretty aware of those games now, but I take all of the lore from those games and then apply it directly to the context of Remake. So like looking at the function of Sephiroth in context of like Advent Children, and a lot of people kind of go into, well, maybe this Sephiroth from Remake is a future Sephiroth, like some sort of like time traveling Sephiroth. Well, okay, that is like a good place to start. That's usually what a lot of people sort of, when they start looking to theory crafting this game, sort of jump to the conclusion of. But like, what's the context of time travel? Like, how does that make sense in the function of like the lore? Like, how does that? Is there something that explains that in the lore of Final Fantasy VII? Is there a way to explain the whispers? And a lot of that's like the brief like overview of like what this series is about, is just looking at all that information, cataloging it, and then presenting it. So
awesome. Yeah. So yeah,
like depth, like there's like five videos that kind of go over it, but we can get into each part a little bit if you want. Just a general summary of those things too.
I think that'd be a good idea. I think you probably want to at least kind of get to your grand conclusion, because I think your grand conclusion has a particular place in this conversation, because it addresses, I think, a lot of the fears associated with the direction Remake is headed.
And I definitely get that. So like I said, like I just released the 5th part of this series, and that video mainly goes into the fact of looking at, I know that a lot of people have been worried about like the sequel to Remake because of the Whisper Harbinger, time and destiny, all these elements sort of tossing in to the ending there right at the end. and people wondering if the entire story is going to change for the rest of Remake. Are we going to not get the same game that we were hoping to get essentially from the beginning? From my research, I would say it doesn't seem like that's the case, at least from my perspective, just with like what I've researched. Just because there's a lot of interesting like little hints, but the general consensus that I came to at the end of the video series is that it's not that the original story is changing. It's more like what Remake really is at the end is a retelling of the compilation with like the original story of Final Fantasy VII as like the vehicle to like retell the compilation. Because a lot of people like, I mean, I don't think this is too controversial to say, don't necessarily like the compilation as much as the original. And there's a lot of outstanding, really dumb plot elements to the compilation that people don't like. But for the most part, from what we've seen of Remake so far, there's already several instances just within Remake alone that is already reshaping the compilation to fit the story of the original Final Fantasy VII, rather than the original changing to like, you know, this weird, like obscure story that we never played before. You know what I mean?
Right. So I got an interesting question here in the chat from Mugen Head Ninja. This is definitely going to be more so aimed for you guys. It's crazy how in The Maiden That Travels the Planet, Aerith mentions in the live stream, time can flow as fast or as slow as she wills it. Actually, I think I remember seeing this when I rewatched part 1 of your video before coming onto the stream. But anyway, is it possible that it's not the extent of how time flows? Could it flow backwards if one wills it strong enough?
So, yeah, just to give some context to that question, a lot of what part 5 is of my video series is trying to like talk about the function of time in Remake, because obviously like people are like, how does Aerith know as much as she does? Like, where is she from the future or all these other things? There's a lot of context to hint at. I will say that the function of time in the Final Fantasy VII universe has everything to do with memories. So when somebody dies in the world of Final Fantasy VII, their energy, which is a part of the life stream, is reincorporated into the system of the planet. But there are pieces of that energy that kind of go into to serve different functions, so to speak. And the memories of that person are actually what are the building blocks, so to speak, of the timeline. So all of the accumulated memories of those on the planet who have lived and died construct this. So the idea is that Aerith is tapping into that sort of energy, that physical form of like the representation of time, sort of like how the whispers are the physical representation of like destiny, so to speak. So yeah, I do think that it's possible that that's sort of the way that I frame it in the video too, is that rather than seeing it just as time travel, if time is constructed by memories and all those things are just in the planet's live stream, you could just essentially say that what Aerith is tapping into is just that knowledge from the planet that already exists, rather than her jumping back from OG or something like that.
Puddle Jumper 16 in the chat says a chain of memories, if you will.
Actually, that's a solid reference. That's a solid reference.
The video title and part is the same. It's the melodies of what is it?
Melody of Memory. Yeah.
Yeah. It's I play on that as So definitely a little Kingdom Hearts vibes, I'm sure, for some people, but
yeah.
So I do want to tack in on Maiden. Okay, Maiden is very controversial because it's not written by Nojima. Its canonicity is always constantly questioned. One of the ways you know it's not written by Nojima is that it reads really well. And I'm not trying to dig too hard on Nojima. I think he actually creates pretty good scenarios that and just because there was that one time where Titus blew his head off by kicking that beach ball,
I knew
and
it.
there was a bunch of necrophilia. Like we can't. The short story about Aerith that finally got a really good translation. By the way, on the World Preview book, which was another question asked here, is he is the author, so to speak, of the world. It is very much a group effort, and if you look through the development cycle, they all collaborate. But one person that has really not collaborated anything other than Maiden is the author of Maiden. But to say this, there is another Ultimania for Final Fantasy VII Remake, and it is weird that they're doing this. That's coming out later this year, and Benny Matsumaya's story, Maiden Who Travels a Planet, will be included in that. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
But that being said, the point that is made here about time, about how, like, do we really know what the developers are intending to express with time? I mean, they're not quantum physicists, like the way that they talk about time, the way that they talk about memory, timelines and stuff like that, it's in general, and I'm sure you've experienced this plenty, Night Sky, the narrative constraints that Western authors have about things making sense. Like, continuity is a lot more important.
For Western audience, for Western writers, it's like way huger.
It's much huge. And so are we dealing with alternate timelines? Okay, so this is one of the main points that I've been hammered on to talk about, and that's that. So for the record, I'm about 80% sure that we're dealing with alternate timelines. That's what's going on. I'm like 80% sure.
Yeah, that's how I feel too.
Does the Ultimania confirm multiple timelines? No.
Really?
No, it does not.
Really?
Okay, and this is a common misconception. So what I'm going to do is so Audrey, who is a superstar. She, whenever anything comes out that's lore relevant to Final Fantasy VII, she's out there translating it super quick.
She's amazing. She's amazing.
She has a grasp of the language, but she has to put out so much. There are going to be some things she misses. So one of the things and Reddit was really quick to catch on this. There's a Reddit user named MKillerB, who's awesome. And then also, just for the process of making these videos, Sleepezi and I have had to sort of employ Japanese speakers. We have a think tank of people that speak multiple languages. And so I'm going to, so the part you're referring to, I'm going to, I'll actually post it on chat here. This is a translation of the Ultimania Zack portion. What does Zack's victory mean? And this is a translation agreed upon by 3 different native speakers.
Okay, cool. Post it in here, and I'll give it a read for you.
There's definitely been a lot of that going on, just between.
Will you please read it in your NSP voice? I love your NSP voice.
Oh yeah, of course I will. That's actually like my default reading voice. So people think that I have like 2 voices. I'm like, no, that's how I sound like when I'm like sort of like reading, or like I'm basically.
Okay, we're gonna do it.
Here we go.
Parts, so.
All right, so I'll start with what you have right here. Pursued by Shinra, approaching Midgar until it is before his very eyes, shot to death at a close hand. This is the description of Zack's final moments in the international/original version of FF7 and Crisis Core FF7. In the original in the remake, however, Zack completely defeats the Shinra troops and survives. It is heading to an unexpected development. Furthermore, in the ending, Zack is carrying an unconscious Cloud, and Cloud and Aerith, standing at Midgar, pass by one another. And that this scene is originally impossible, Cloud existing at the same place time in these 2 points is obvious. This time, due to how the two are not recognizing each other's existence, although it can be guessed that it does not mean that they are in the same place and time. Nothing further than this point in time is understood.
So FYI, there was a same place and time is supposed to be there, but I just barely hit the character limit and chose the wrong 3 letters to take out of there. But so here's what, if you read the interview, I mean,
so Puddle Jumper asks, what the fuck does that mean? I'm kind of in the same place. Like,
I get it.
So what does that mean? Like, what?
So what that means is that they're not answering. That's what that means. They make it very vague, and the mental, the absolute diplomacy of the way that Nomura answers in the Ultimania interview about, like, he's asked by the interviewer directly, like, "Hey, Zack survives. What the fuck, bro?" And and Nomura's answer is, "Well, that's part of the mystery we've set up for future parts." He doesn't confirm anything,
right?
But at that point, that's when Nojima, like, so smugly, like, he's so proud, you can tell, responds, "Hey, did you notice Stamp?" Like, and so obviously the fact that Stamp is different is a major clue as to why we're seeing something different with Zack.
Right.
I would assume that that's alternate timelines. And another reason I'd assume it's alternate timelines, and this is an easily dismissible point. Later in that very same interview, he's asked the question, "What does the steel sky mean?" And Nomura answers, "Well, she misses the steel sky because the sky is where the souls of her mother and Zack went," meaning that Zack is dead by the perspective of Aerith. And so if Zack is dead, it's likely he's dead in a different realm. But there are other possibilities. And, a lot of them center around Jenova. Jenova is this new force in Remake. Jenova's role has been amplified since the compilation started, but it really takes a new shape in Remake. Right. The Ultimania description of Jenova is downright shockingly different. Like, it somewhat implies that any proximity to Jenova corrupts you, and I'm not sure if you've taken the time to read Nojima's magnum opus, The Kids Are All Right.
I have it, but I still have not started. I know I disappoint a lot of people with that. Yeah, go on.
It's much better than 10.2.5, but one of the things that Sung theorizes in that story, and to remind you, the most recent bit of Final Fantasy VII lore relevant compilation stuff is The Kids Are All Right. That is the last thing to release before Remake. And Sung theorizes that Jenova was in control of Hojo, that Hojo's exposure to Jenova is what set Hojo down the path of creating Sephiroth in the first place.
Hojo did nothing wrong.
We trash on Hojo, but Hojo outplayed Vincent for Lucrezia. Like, dude's got to have skills.
Yeah, he's a chat. He's a chat.
Dude.
100%.
That's right, Otto. All dong.
Is the chat saying Sleepezi, we can't hear you well.
Is this good?
Yeah, you're good. Okay. Cool.
I'm okay.
Okay, go on.
Back, him do his thing.
So the level at which Jenova is now a part of the story, like, you fight Jenova, and that's a big difference. You don't fight Jenova till Junin, and sure, they have to introduce the concept of Jenova and figure out what that is. For narrative reasons, there's obvious stuff, but the level at which Jenova seems to be part of the lore here has been increasing steadily. And there's actually developer statements that there were regrets about the way that Jenova unfolded in the original game. That there's a lot that went into that. Parasite Eve was coming out, and so they needed to borrow bits of Parasite Eve. There's Lavos comparisons, all sorts of stuff. And so the development of Jenova, I think, is really opens up a bunch of possibilities. And I think the reason I'm saying this is that, I've spent 400 hours in the game, and we are way deep in the lore, enough that sometimes I don't like it, like I'm fucking over it, like several times. But really, like, I'm not gonna. I have trouble sealing the deal on the meta plot because I don't really know what it is. I have no idea. I was so sure that it was 100% like, Max Dude's interpretation. And I hate to say it, I love Max Dude, but he kind of poisoned the well a little bit of the way that we all perceive Remake.
Yeah.
And and I think that's important to know. I'm just gonna because this ties to this point, I'm just gonna make this and then let other people talk. One of the other things I keep that came up on a couple of your other streams, particularly with First Class Soldier, great guy, is that if they wanted to tell a different story, well, then they just could have, and that they didn't need the whispers to do that.
Yeah,
and I actually don't think that's the point of the whispers. I don't think the whispers are necessarily meant to be a representation of OG Destiny. And there's a lot of little clues to that. One is that several events do happen differently in Remake with no whisper involvement. I mean, we make it to Deep Ground and there's no whispers.
In fact, I would even say that a lot of the best new moments, like going to like Jesse's parents' house or like fighting with Rosh and all that other stuff, was just new. And there was no catalyst for why it was new. It was just new.
And I think part of that is, I don't think that necessarily the takeaway on the whispers was this way to separate yourselves from the compilation or even attach yourself to it. Like, one, there are a lot of parallels between the whispers and Jenova. A bunch of weird ones, like, for instance, the real obvious one of Laz, Yazoo, and Kazoo. Laz, Yazoo, and Kadaj are, represented in the Rubrum, Croseo, and Viridai. That's an obvious tie. Honestly, the whispers themselves look like Sephiroth clones. They're robed figures. In Japanese, they use the same word for robed figures. The enigmatic specter, which is the purple specter that in both specter fights, that's the sort of the kingpin. You have to defeat that to move forward. One, purple has a bunch of Jenova energy associated with it, just like purple's got this dark side of the Force vibe. If you watch any of Sleepezi's videos, like, just you're looking for purple in the real world.
Yeah, purple. I can't even play the game now, and like every time I see something purple, I'm like, oh shit, this is what Sleepezi talked about.
Dude, I was getting tripped out on purple flowers when playing Ghost of Tsushima. I'm like, oh shit.
Like, here we go. The timeline chasing. Actually, go on and finish your point. There's a question in here that I actually really want to take. But go ahead and finish your point.
I will. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah. You're good. This is like a really good question, actually. So go on though.
The enigmatic specter has 4 moves that in Japanese are all moves that Sephiroth has had in different variants of the compilation.
Really?
Furthermore, the Japanese translation of the assessment of the Whisper Harbinger says a unification of whispers. Reunion vibe. There's a bunch of stuff that thematically tie them together. Does that mean that that's what they are? No, but there's lines drawn to it, and finally, and I think this is probably the most important narrative reason for the Whispers is they represent the planet. And as much as we'd like to say that, Final Fantasy VII is this, it's about, it's about protecting nature. It's a complicated story that talks about the relationship between the planet and its constituents, and the relationship that the planet has with the Cetra, humanity, even Jenova is very interesting, complex, and there's a lot of lessons that can be taken from it. And I think the Whispers and by extension, the Arbiters are more a way of expressing that conflict, and that's the direction that they'll be ultimately represented. I don't think the Whispers are gone either. I hate to say that.
Yeah, I definitely don't think they're gone because they built up so much lore around them. I think for them to just be gone and like nothing else to be made out of them just does not make any sense for me. And then like for us to like get to Bugenhagen in part 2 and just him just lore dump all of it on us at one point, like that's why that was there, and then we just never mention it again. So yeah, I don't think the Whispers are gone either. I completely agree with you. The question here that I thought was pretty interesting, and I really want to hear from you guys since you guys know so much about the lore. Gene Garcia asks, do you think Destiny was always a theme? That's what we ain't getting off this train meant to me. Now, me personally, answering that question, I don't think that Destiny was really a theme in Final Fantasy VII. Not really. For me, what like something like we ain't no getting off this train is basically like it's not literally, but it's almost saying that like that we've kind of chosen our path in life, and this is how we're basically going to live and die, more or less.
I absolutely did not see it that way. I thought that ain't no getting off this train was, I mean, it's even in reference to class divide. It's a reference to how poverty affects people and affects things, and how hard it is to get up from the slums. So it's a representation of oppression. That's the way that I saw that, and you could argue that has to do with Destiny and the defeat of Destiny. If you're going to break that,
I was actually going to jump in on that, which is that I think it's sort of in Remake almost a little bit of what both of you guys are saying, which is that rather than this is something that I know comes up often when we start talking about Destiny is that that's going to be the overwhelming theme, since it was so pressed on in just this first part of a Remake, where I almost feel like instead of it being the focus, I think it's more of like a complementary theme to like the original OG, rather than it's like its main focus, so to speak. So I definitely that while Clark, you're bringing up class, I think that we definitely see a lot of comparisons to all sides in Remake. So we see a lot of Avalanche being compared to like Shinra, and we see, and just from our knowledge of OG, like you can see that sort of same mentality that President Shinra has being reflected also in like the planet and like the principles. They're all just kind of doing what they need to do to sort of gain power for themselves. That's kind of what President Shinra's painting with Barrett is that there's not much of a difference between them. And if he hasn't thought about it, then he's kind of like the president just thinks he's ridiculous, for not seeing for like himself for what he really is. And that's most likely, and this goes back to something that you mentioned, Clark, about the translation stuff, is one of the things that is stated in the game in the English translation, but not stated in the Audrey translations, is that Barrett is actually is like separated from the group of Avalanche, the bigger group of Avalanche, because they are extreme. That's how it's translated by Audrey, but it's actually because Barrett is the extreme one, which
it's the exact opposite meaning. Yeah,
right. Which is it's stated in the game, so it's like that's easy to sort of compare. But I guess the point that I was trying to make with that is that it's that sort of extreme behavior that he's taking that is definitely putting him, because he's like bombing reactors, and we see that firsthand in just Remake and how that's affecting everybody's lives just from doing that. But it's like mitigating that damage, right? It's like we're doing this because it's good for the planet, but like all of these lives are being lost at the same time. And that's sort of like what Shinra's angle is. And then that's also the planet's angle with like the weapons. It's like the weapons are just like going to do whatever it takes to just serve a function of the planet. So I think that that's definitely coming into play with both of the ideas that you guys brought up, which is that that's a class issue, but then like, what do you do after you have that power? Like, what is Barrett going to do? And we know what happens to Barrett after OG is that he just starts looking for oil, and he actually has nothing to do with rebuilding the civilization in AC. Really, it's mainly Rufus who's like trying to gun in to be in charge at that point, and builds the city of Edge and the compilation. So it's just an interesting thing to think about, I guess.
So Gene Garcia then followed up on that question by saying, being a puppet could also involve the theme of destiny. No. Well, yeah. But I mean, there's two ways you can interpret destiny from my point of view, right? There is the destiny that I feel like that real human beings experience. And then there is like destiny like as like a universal force, which is really only experienced in fiction. So like like an arbitrary example of what I mean by the latter is something like King Arthur being the only one who can like lift Excalibur from the stone, because that's King Arthur's like destiny, right? Destiny that I feel like we experience in real life would be something closer to like what Yuna had to go through in Final Fantasy X, where she didn't really have to do anything that she did. Yuna didn't have to do any of those things, but there were societal and religious expectations of her, and people in real life experience that. And so I feel like there's a definite difference between like stuff that the destiny that people like actually experience in real life, which destiny doesn't actually exist in real life. It's really just people and organizations telling you that you need to do stuff. And then there is like this universal force of destiny, like a higher power destiny. And that's something that we really only visibly see in fiction for the most part, unless you have certain beliefs or stuff that make you feel like that stuff is happening in real life. But for the most part, there's a certain way in which that we only see that in fiction. Like I say, like with King Arthur pulling Excalibur, because that's King Arthur's like destiny to do so. So yeah, so whenever I hear people talk about like destiny has always been like a theme in Final Fantasy, it has at some points, but then I think a lot of people they sort of take anything to be like, or someone being like born into a certain role to be destiny in the same sense as a universal force, like the Arbiters.
I'm gonna jump in here and just answer a question. Really,
go on.
Mugen, by the way, thanks for commenting. You mentioned this in some of your videos, Sleepezi. So contrary to Before Crisis and Remake, Barrett's cell of Avalanche are the more extreme ones, while the other cells aren't as crazy as their Before Crisis counterparts. So yeah, in Remake, as it is now, there shouldn't actually really exist this larger Avalanche. In the OG,
destined?
Huh? No, because Barrett is the only division that actually like is present that we know of in the original Final Fantasy VII. By the time in the compilation that Final Fantasy VII starts, Avalanche as a bigger organization is kind of disbanded. Like, that's putting it lightly. is that the people in command are either killed or like they go into hiding. So the fact that they show up in Remake at all is a really strange turn of events, and it's very contradictory to like compilation lore, which is a bigger subject that we can get into. But to finish that thought is that the reason why it's weird is because Barrett is seen as the extreme one is because by the time that Barrett would have become a part of Avalanche in the timeline, the person who would have been the head of Avalanche as a bigger group is the antagonist of Before Crisis, which is Fajito. And if just like a brief, like he's extreme, like he's the most extreme person when it comes to protecting the planet. Like he wants to send people back to the life stream so that it has enough energy to protect itself. So he will just like murder his own subordinates or like just anybody in his way. But he's actually the guy who creates the plan to bomb the reactors in Final Fantasy VII. So the idea, like the plan of going into Mako Reactor 1 in Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VII Remake supposedly would be Fajito's plan. So that's a contradictory thing, is that if Avalanche exists, then it's probably not Fajito who's in charge in Remake. It's probably somebody else that we haven't seen, or maybe one of the other existing characters. There's 3 leaders. So.
Right, because we do know that in the world preview that it does at least confirm a portion of this in the timeline. It says that during the month between the Zack's last stand and then the beginning of the events of Remake or OG, depending on how you look at it, during that month, we know that the leader of Avalanche is killed. According to the world preview timeline, we don't necessarily know if that's supposed to be, the way that it comes out in Remake. I think you're probably right. I think chances are we're going to get bits and pieces of the spirit of Before Crisis just interwoven into the story of Remake. I think that's more likely, but it is definitely a contradiction. I mean, there's no ands, ifs, or buts. Although I will say it is weird, though, that that even the game information says that Barrett was too extreme, despite like Biggs makes that comment that they're the ones here in mil-spec gear. So they're going to do some weird shit with Avalanche.
Rick is referring to in the world premiere that just released, there is a timeline of events that was released with that book. And a lot of like compilation lore is referred to in that, but it's not like outright stated. So like there's a lot of things that lead to, like, for instance, the assassination of Fajito, but they just call it that. They're just like, and then the leader of Avalanche is assassinated.
The chaos gene.
We can get into that later. But yeah, I just want to make sure that question was answered. And I know that there was a deep ground question earlier, and I'll look into it again. But yeah, there's a lot of details like that sprinkled throughout the remake, and a lot of compilation nods too. Specifically, actually, there's a mention of a Before Crisis incident in the beginning of Remake, where they mention the attempt on the president's life. That's actually like reference directly to like the Before Crisis, like one of the first missions. I think it's the second mission, and Fajito shoots the president. So the fact that it's even acknowledging the presence of that idea is extremely strange. It definitely gives a little bit more validity to like how much they're paying attention to things that they've already made in the timeline, or like characters or events. So a lot of fun things to look out for. I'm especially excited for like the Nibelheim incident to see how they.
Yeah. Oh God. Oh God.
I don't think that they will, but I that's definitely going to be a big tell, because there's even, other than like the big change being like in Crisis Core Genesis is a part of that Nibelheim scene, which is like the big do not do that for everybody who knows about that scene. They do not want it in Remake. There's some other variations of it, like Sephiroth jumping into the live stream rather than being thrown into an OG. It's like depending on what they do with that scene is going to tell us like a huge amount as to like how much they're planning on like integrating.
It's the scene with the most versions. There are 4 versions of that scene in the compilation, and they're all different.
I was going to say, are they going to retcon it again? I feel like they are.
I think the most important thing about that scene, I'd love to say that it's Genesis, because we all hate Genesis and all that stuff, and but I really doubt Genesis is going to make an appearance at that scene. And I think the way the Genesis, if Genesis is going to appear in the game in any way, it's going to be something more referential, kind of like the way that he's already referenced in Remake. He's
about to bring that.
Yeah, he's referenced pretty constantly. He's the G-type soldiers, and then all of the strange experiments in Deep Ground and in Hojo's laboratory all have Genesis vibes. They've got the red, they've got the wing on the right side. They've got all that Genesis shit going on. But there's no gact on their face, so it's all good.
But that's really the question too. Does Square want to pay like another few $1 million to gact in order to license?
I don't think it'd be a good idea for them for a couple of reasons. I think he's tainted now for he's got some scandals. He's had some scandals in 2011. He's tainted. He's older and it's weird.
Yeah.
I think if they want, if they could fix Genesis if they gender bent Genesis, if Genesis were female, I think that would be a huge and then if maybe like if they toned down the Loveless 30%, Genesis would have been a much better character overall.
We'll say there's a lot in just like I completely agree with Clark, is that the representation of Genesis is the biggest problem that I have with him in Crisis Core, but I think that character could easily be fixed if they wanted to and make him maybe a little less like poetry man, I guess, in like that every other line of dialogue of his. But I will say that like even I think that it would be interesting to just see more of him sort of trickled throughout the game in some fashion. Even though, like Clark already mentioned, is that in Deep Ground, he's pretty much, he's like blatantly referenced, like in 10 different areas. And also the fact that Deep Ground exists is also just a mention to him, because Deep Ground doesn't actually exist without Genesis. So I think what Nibelheim will ultimately tell us more about how it actually went down is Cloud. And somehow Cloud is still one of the most mysterious characters in the compilation. In the 4 different versions of the Nibelheim incident, the real big difference has been Cloud and how he displays power. Like, it is confusing that Cloud is as strong as he is at 16 with no Mako in his system and no Jenova cells. Now, the Last Order attempted to kind of make an explanation of this by saying that the blood that was on Sephiroth's sword had Jenova cells because he had just chopped off Jenova's head and then stabbed him with it. That's why he had that little glint of green in his eyes. And then just Sephiroth like committed suicide off the thing. It wasn't like this super badass moment like in the OG and in in Crisis Core. And like we still don't know who Cloud's father is. Like we know that his mother's name is Claudia, which sounds super made up, right? like if his dad's not named Claudio, I'm gonna be really mad.
It's gonna be Claude.
There's gonna be well, it was originally gonna be Claude. I'm not sure if you knew that.
Oh, I didn't, but that's actually that's fucking funny. Holy shit.
Yeah. But Nibelheim means home of the clouds. That's where we get the name. So there's going to be some weird. I hope. See, as somebody that really loves the lore of the world, I love that they spent all this time adding all these little weird details. And for me, like, so if I were to rate this game, I'd give it a 9.5. And I played Ghost of Tsushima, and if I were to like compare the two games, I'd say I can't find anything wrong with Ghost of Tsushima. Like, it's great. There's no bad part. I like Final Fantasy VII Remake more, and it had plenty of flaws, because I think there's an inherent problem in rating a game by starting it, it's perfect, and then you just rate it on how many flaws it has. And the experiential value I had of playing Remake really overshadowed the worst possible conclusion that the Whisper stuff could mean. Like, if it's like the most insane BS, if the live stream sword thing is it, which by the way doesn't totally make sense, but I have quoted you on saying that that and the dual sense up your ass thing. If it turns out to be that, and I don't want that, like, very hard, I don't want that. I don't think that's what's going to happen, but I don't want it to be like Zack, Cloud, and Sephiroth combined against super evil Jenova Roth.
It's going to happen, man.
Kill them all with the live stream sword. It's using the power of friendship. And Aerith is praying great gospel in the background. Obama is there. I don't want any of that. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. But even if that happened, the experience of Remake was really incredible to me. And I love AAA games. So that's I think my take on the game.
Right.
What do you think?
I'll just say that I obviously I think after putting 8 hours into videos, I think I'm definitely it's up there for me too. And one of the things that I'm just like a super fan of, and this is just my own opinion of like media that I consume, is what I really appreciate is a lot of attention to detail is something that I'm really, really into. And not only does Final Fantasy VII Remake have a lot of that, it also just seems like very, very from the heart for the most part. I think that they spent a lot of time in the areas that they knew people wanted, and it seems like they even like in compilation stuff, which was completely unnecessary. Unnecessary.
Yeah, some of the callbacks to the compilation lore include like textures and stuff like that they have to work hard to include, and generally nobody but us will notice.
Like a really easy one to say is that there's Behemoth Type 0. I'm sure that you guys are all familiar with that that secret boss, quote unquote, right? Is that it's in Deep Ground. It's a Deep Ground reference, right? But actually going into more detail than that, just with its character model, is that the horn of the behemoth that you get for the quest item, it's identical to a Dirge of Cerberus villain's model. It's insane. So there's this behemoth or a character in Dirge of Cerberus called Azul de Cerulean. And the horn, when he transforms into a behemoth, is the same horn that they stuck onto the remake Behemoth Type 0.
Now, to be clear, we searched every behemoth in all of Final Fantasy down, like poured through everything trying to find a match.
That's the only one, which is insane. So it's directly referencing this character, this game that is mostly and generally not liked. They just to like pay homage to like those who have played it and stuck it, and like for the most part, that reference is mainly being hinted, as far as we can tell right now, is that's like an early experiment that ends up leading to Azul from Dirge of Cerberus. But Remake just decided to put that in the game.
Or it could be Azul, and that's how in the Remake universe we get that reference to Deep Ground. I mean, either are possible, and either are probably fine and good. You know,
and that type of stuff is ultimately what I appreciate most about Remake as well, is that they do sort of make those references. But I think this actually would be a good point to actually ask you guys, is your interpretation that this is sort of and what's the best way to put it, almost linear continuation from the compilation, and this is sort of the timeline being reset? Or do you think that they're making references to the compilation? Essentially what I'm trying to ask is, do you think they're taking the compilation's canon and including it into Remake and rewriting things that worked and that didn't work? Or do you think that it's just straight up a continuation from where the compilation left off, and then this is just a straight up sequel? Or do you think it's like both, like somewhere in between those things?
I think
if that makes sense.
Of what you mentioned, I think it's sort of a melding of two. So like one of the things that you mentioned with Genesis in your video, and it's something that I completely agree with, is that because that storyline is set up in the compilation and just never resolved, there's a want from people to see that story resolved to a certain degree. And since it seems like they're paying attention to compilation lore to a certain degree, I think that will pay off. But there's actually like a number of those things that are never actually resolved. So like one of the things being like the negative life stream, which we can get into later, which is maybe the cause of a lot of the events that are happening in Remake, in my opinion, is something that gets solved with just this one part of this game. I think it's definitely them paying attention to all the things that they didn't tie up, but not wanting to get in the way of the story of Final Fantasy VII. So I think if I were to say, like, it's not the compilation being injected into the story of OG, it's more like we're going to retailor the story of this to fit the story of the original rather than put it at the forefront. I think it's a supporting role only.
Right. And I think that's a genius way for them to actually include the compilation in.
Already happened, which is the crazy part, and that's why like a lot of these videos are so long that I make, is because there's so many just like little nods to the compilation as a whole, and so many different ways that that information can be translated. But I think that's, from what I've experienced, that's what they're doing.
Right.
I think the well is a little poisoned. And the developers don't help this. Like, they say weird cryptic stuff. Sometimes the stuff they say misleads us. Sometimes they tell us things that we would have had absolutely no idea about before at all. Like Eligor, like in the stupid Square Enix app Portal story, like we finally learned that Eligor materializes because he senses the incumbent death that's going to happen as a result of the plate collapse, and wants to ensure it happens. Like yeah, and we had no idea. Yeah, we had no idea. Like, and what the fuck is Minerva? Minerva is the will of the planet. Did you know that from playing Crisis Core? Me, nope. The fuck.
Nope.
So essentially, Minerva and the Whispers occupy some of the same space. Internally. Like, there's probably more to it than that. But so sometimes the developers can be frustrating, and they did poison the well with a couple of things. One, this is the fifth title in the compilation. Well, okay, great. That makes it seem like we're leaning on the idea that it's a sequel then, if it's the fifth title in the compilation. I mean, there isn't necessarily anything in a compilation that requires things to be told sequentially. If you look at the release order of the compilation, it is not told chronologically. It is told in backwards chronology. So, like, that it's part of the compilation doesn't technically make it a sequel. Then Nomura's statement, ask me in a couple of years what I mean by the word remake, right? And so then we get, the well poisoned by, probably a lot of people, not just Max Dude. I think a lot of people would have said this also. And that's that, Sephiroth is remaking the Final Fantasy VII timeline. You know what? He might be. That might still be an option. That might be what's going on. It could be future Sephiroth. It could be the weird incarnation of future Kadaj, Laz, and Yazoo that get absorbed into the life stream by Aerith at the end of AC Complete, now formed as Edge of Creation Sephiroth, which explains why he uses the different pronouns. There's a bunch of different stuff it can be, but really, we probably won't get like a ultra concrete answer to any of that, because that's not really how they value narrative style. Like as storytellers, it doesn't matter as much to them what the lines look like. It's more about, what are the general themes? And they put all these details in that are homages. Nomura is very visual. I know you're a big fan. You have a lot of love and respect for Nomura, NSP, and he just of all the hate that goes towards this game, he gets the brunt of it for some reason. Yeah. Even though if you look at developer interviews, he's actually the guy kind of trying not to change as much.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's because a lot of the ideas are stylistically his, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah.
Like the Arbiters of Fate, like conceptually, if you think about it, you look at it, and you're kind of like, this is very much his style. And so people look to him. And then, of course, he's the director, right? And the director, no matter what title it is, always gets the brunt of everything, whether it's all the blame and the praise. 300 or 400 people probably worked on this game or any AAA game that comes out. And whether it sucks or whether it's great, the one person people look at is just they hone in on the director. The director either ruined the whole project, not that 200 or 300 other people working on it, or he made the project great. So
yeah. And that's not to say that Remake and Final Fantasy VII won't still have more cohesion than the rest of Final Fantasy Dom. It does benefit from one of the most well-built world systems. Like, you don't necessarily need to read all the bizarre history like you did with Final Fantasy 15, and there's really no chance of Cloud ending up in real world France at the end of this compilation somehow. There's
I hope.
Yeah.
That live stream blade, dude, I'm telling you.
I had to go with that, and then the live stream blade thing got mentioned, and I just was thrown.
Sorry, go on, man.
What was the point you just made, Clark?
Me? No, that the world is really well built.
That's what. Yeah. So there was an earlier comment that was said about in Dirge of Cerberus. There's actually a fair bit of information, it seems like, that explains maybe the presence of the Whispers even before Final Fantasy VII Remake came out, where it's more rather than the function of just like this new game and it just was like thrown onto us. There is a lot of information that seems to indicate that it's more of a repurposed idea, like a new context for an idea that has been introduced from the original game, which is like the Cries of the Planet. And then in Dirge of Cerberus, there's like a scene that pretty much like just goes right into it, which is that you hear the Cries of the Planet like you do in like the original, but it has slight almost nodding to Sephiroth's line at the Destiny's Crossroads scene. So I think that while we were saying that like Nomura kind of has his hands all over this, I think that if that is the case and all of these are like purposeful references, that to me indicates that I'm in safer hands than I actually thought even after I played it, because I was actually more on the page with you, NSP, which was just like, I didn't really fully grasp why I enjoyed the game that I played. And I was also hesitant to just immediately love it after playing it, and I'm not saying that this is necessary to enjoy the game, but one of the things that I found was just because of all those details that are in the compilation, that appear in this game, it definitely made me appreciate what the final product of part 1 was more than I did when I first played it. Just so many interesting details. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Read some of these chat questions.
Chat has been very much going wild. Someone had asked if another Final Fantasy had ended the same way that I was describing, where they defeat the bad guy with a blade like made out of like human souls, like the live stream. That did happen. That's how Lightning Returns basically ends. Sorry to spoil that for anyone who's playing it right now, but yeah, that's how Lightning Returns basically ends, where like the souls of humanity like form a blade that kills God, which is so JRPG, right?
Yeah, just as long as the escalation to all of a sudden killing God. It's very
and
very on the nose.
Which actually brings me into my next sort of big discussion topic for you guys. If we are dealing with multiple timelines, are they going to converge? Or what's the general purpose of them if they're not going to converge, especially?
This is Sleepezy's favorite topic.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sleepezi, speak for me.
I actually think that my least favorite thing introduced is that concept.
Same.
I'm not saying that it's bad interpretation of the events that are happening either. I genuinely can only see a couple of reasons how that will pay off in a good way. And I'm not even saying in like the best way. Like there's no best way to me of explaining like Zack thing. The best one I can think of is that there's, and not to say like I always felt like Zack's character kind of fittingly ended where it should have.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Yeah.
And to go on is a very odd concept to me, only unless you're sort of playing into sort of the bigger tragedy of this. Because I know that you guys have brought this up, you in First Class and other streams, where it's like, that's something that they need to hit home, is like the tragedy of this. And like, if you don't have Zack dying, if you don't have Aerith dying, then what kind of story do you have? Ultimately, maybe not one that is Final Fantasy VII. And I completely agree with that. I think that Zack, I'm not like, don't take this with a grain of salt, because I haven't talked about him at all. I think that he's going to end up being a tool for Sephiroth at some point, just in the same way that like Cloud is in the compilation. But that's the only good that I can see of Zack being included. I don't think that I think that the timelines are more or less already attached. So I question.
Hey, Skittle13, thank you for the gift sub. Appreciate it.
I think you've brought this up, and why introduce an alternate timeline if they're not going to merge? You're right. If that's what's going on, they're going to merge, and there is a great potential to fail the story when you do that. Definitely, you're not wrong about that. There is narrative potential in the alternate timeline Zack in telling a lot of the story that the compilation could only tell, while Cloud and co do their thing. It's possible that we might get to see Zack do something that brings us to portions of the lore that we don't have wrapped up. We don't understand the mechanics of Minerva and the planet and how the G project happened. There's a lot of areas for Zack to explore. There's Avalanche and Wutai and how that is all very different now. So Zack could be a vehicle to explore the meta plot. He could. And he also, we talk about who would be the best villain. in part 2. And I think if they're bold, either Zack or Cloud. And, I don't think this is going to happen. I think this would be too rough. But, if we learn that the level of deception that Jenova is capable of is even higher and higher, and why? Like, it is really weird. Cloud is more unstable by this portion of the game than he was in OG. And that could just be because the game ends earlier. But he straight up, has to get talked out of murdering 2 people, Johnny and Reno, by the respective characters. So it's a little weird. And so, I mean, if Cloud ended up being the one that killed Aerith.
Yeah.
I, for one,
totally a possibility there, right?
I would be so happy simply so that I would get the opportunity to watch fan reaction videos, just because there's a certain segment of the population I know that would go absolutely nuts if it happened, and I just want to watch them squirm. So that's the dark part of me that wants it. But also, how do you top Sephiroth? That's an interesting point, and you've brought that up with on your Persona stream when you're talking mad shit on Sephiroth.
That was a good stream.
It was a good stream. But here's what I'll say on that. Okay, so Sephiroth, one is toying with the group pretty clearly. Like, he's a hard fight. He's toying the group, and what will compel that fight to be gnarlier in the future? Well, the fact that he kills Aerith. I mean, dude, we're gonna want to kill that dude.
Yeah.
Especially how charming and amazing of a character they've made Aerith in Remake, and so I still think there's a lot of potential in amplifying our distress over Sephiroth, and as far as Zack dying, until Crisis Core, I didn't really care that Zack died. It was just I wasn't sad about it.
Yeah, nobody really cared, honestly. Yeah,
I was like,
Crisis
whatever,
Core.
I don't care. And honestly, Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse, I didn't really care either. When Jesse died in Remake, that was brutal. That was super harsh. And there's a difference. And it's because we've now spent several hours as opposed to just 8 talking to, sprites with very little backstory. Wedge has a twin brother named Quedge. That's really, there's so little lore on those guys. It's ridiculous.
Very, very briefly in Dirge of Cerberus, outside of there's some lore. One of the sisters of either Biggs or Wedges in
is Biggs.
Biggs. Biggs' sister is a WRO agent, and it's just thrown in last second. So it's
and you're whatever. They're Star Wars references. Who cares? I had zero emotional impact when those 3 died. And so I think there's still plenty of room to grieve. And I still think there's plenty of room for them to tell a story about loss.
Right.
It's going to hurt a lot more.
Right. But do we ever confront that loss, though, if Zack's alive and stuff in another timeline is my question, really. Sleepezi, were you going to say something? Yeah, go on.
I was going to second what Cloud what Clark said, which is that I think this is all setting up, I think, for just some really, really harsh reality situations. I think that the only direction that I see this going in is them leaning into the heartache that made Final Fantasy VII kind of as memorable as it was back then. I almost think that changing that is almost too much. So it seems silly to me that they would, but who knows? But that's just my point of view on it. And I would also like to second that. I generally don't like talking about the Zack thing just because there's so many ways for that to go. Hints of multiple universes, or the assumed multiple universes, the hints of that, or whatever it is.
Or the clone number 2, like Otto says.
Yeah, I mean, that's another totally valid theory in my mind. I think most of them are valid. I just don't see the story relevance of it yet. Right. So I think that's the only part of Remake that I need more information on to sort of solidify any sort of concept of like what this multiple universe thing is. I think it's a good like thematic thing to happen, because there's a lot of that going on in Crisis Core, with like Zack trying to be a hero and he just ends up dying. And for those who haven't seen my theory videos, a lot of my exploration in all 5 videos is the concept of destiny in the compilation, and how that's very, very set in stone, that that's a concept that was set up there rather than just in Remake. There's like several different occasions where it comes up. But one of the ideas is that time is just kind of repeating itself to a certain degree, is that Jenova will come back and the party or whoever who's around will take care of it. And that cycle just keeps repeating itself, so that if there is that sort of like linearity to like this repetitiveness of events, that Zack living is actually like, instead of this guy who is destined to die here, he ends up like they allow him to live, and like him living at the end is more of a like thematic relevant moment, where it's like now he can pursue his dreams that he ends up, you know, losing as soon as he dies. He has to pass that on to Cloud, you know, but now that he's alive, like maybe there's not a need for that. Maybe he gets to go just do his own thing. And honestly, that would be a totally fine way for me. Like, I know they have to because they made such a big deal about it, but it would be nice to leave it as is at that point for me with Zack.
I want to thank I want to thank D Replay for the tier 1. I want to thank Brando's bitch for a prime sub, and whoever anonymously gifts subbed Rezuri. Thank you. Thank you guys. We got the hype train going. Okay, which actually, Sleepezi, I where you put me in a good train of thought, because now it actually makes me want to ask a bigger question, because this comes up a fucking lot, a lot. And it also shows that a lot of people are kind of resistant to the multiverse angle. So what I want to ask you, what are the odds, or is there any possible explanation in your eyes, knowing everything that you know and having done all the research that both of you have, is there any possibility that this is one timeline that we're looking at, and that everything can be explained in a one timeline model, including everything that's happened with Zack so far? Because I think I'm okay with the idea of like a time loop, and I think I can even learn to deal with the destiny thing, even, which I totally am not a big fan, but I can learn. I think it's the multiverse thing that really, for a lot of people, is where their hesitancy comes in. And I always hear people say that, yeah, I'm excited for, you know, Remake 2. But at the same time, I really hope they don't go full Avengers Endgame and try to do that sort of scenario. So again, is there any sort of explanation for everything that we've seen thus far being explained as one timeline?
There's one that I'd like to point out, at least. It's mainly what part 5 is about. But there is definitely like some indication that Sephiroth, like time traveling, isn't necessarily like time traveling per se, but it's more like he is able to affect like just these like certain moments in memories, as we kind of brought up at the beginning of this conversation, is that memories, in my mind, in my opinion, are the construct of time for Final Fantasy VII. And rather than it being like, I'm traveling back through time to like do this and this and this, it's more like the characters at the end of OG are just affecting certain moments that are happening slightly, but they're not like time traveling per se. So if anything, maybe to go back to one of your other questions, is this a sequel? I think the way that I see it now is that it's a sequel to the original game, more than it's a sequel to like Advent Children or something like that. That instead of the compilation kind of going on from there, what they just did is that remake being just a direct sequel from the original is like just retelling the compilation, just one part of it, but like in the context of the original story. I know that this is a confusing answer. I'll try and make it a little bit, more concise. But I think so we have like the cycle of life, right? And we have memories as time. There's a function that is outside of the life stream called the negative life stream. And that's a big part of the compilation because that's how Sephiroth kind of survives in the life stream outside of just his will. That's how Geostigma exists, and all this other stuff. I think that would be the main function of this whole time traveling thing, but not really time travel. I don't want to say time travel. It's more like seeing into the future rather than jumping around, so to speak. Yeah, it's a hard one to explain just without getting all into it. But there are certain functions, I guess I would say, that hint towards it not being like, a time machine or something like that.
Right.
And it's just characters accessing memories. Sephiroth and Aerith, I guess I should say, at the end of OG, are both in a state where they are able to affect the life stream, which is what most of the sequels of the original are about. Is that Sephiroth is meddling with the life stream, Aerith is trying to stop him, and it just seems like rather than trying to make that a story from the compilation, they're just like, well, what if that just happened in the original Final Fantasy VII? So it's just a retelling of the story, not time travel, in my mind.
BabySeal, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. So the negative life stream concept is, it's I think a really compelling potential explanation that subverts the possibility of multiverse. I'm way less concerned about time travel than I am the multiverse, to be honest. So like if this ends up being a sequel, in the broadest sense that it is a sequential result of the events past, let's say AC or past Dirge of Cerberus, like in the potential bad ending of the Final Fantasy VII universe that Katase, once sort of alluded to, that there are no humans alive. Which, by the way, that is like the only time that's really said. And it's just a Katase weird off interview thing. But there is some conflicting information to that. I'm not sure if you knew this, but in the original scripts of AC, or in the actual scripts of Advent Children, it does describe that there is human colonies on Edge during the visual of Midgar from Red 13's perspective.
Oh, okay. No, I didn't know that. Okay.
It ends up not making it into the game, or not making it into the movie, but that doesn't mean that. It's just you really can't use Katase's like off answer to that question and call it like canon. It's just like it's the only place. It's a contentious thing. The folks on the live stream will give you the dickens about it if you want. There's a user in our chat, Ulti786, who actually wrote a really he didn't. I don't even think he's seen any of your videos, Sleepezi, but he wrote a really good post, sort of detailing the same concept that you tell in your video. That's super concise, and I think it's kind of a good like written diagram of what you're describing, with the live stream is composed of memories, that what's very likely happening is negative live stream is corrupting those memories. That's what we're seeing in the Harbingers, and that's what the Whispers are, is negative live stream. It's something real similar to that if you want more exploration of those concepts. I'm hoping he posts it in the chat because it's a really good Reddit post. But to answer your question, I'm about 60% that that we're going to see 2 concurrent timelines for a while, and about 40% that it's some other weird Jenova illusion or memory stuff, and it's single timeline.
Ultima, able to post that link in your chat?
Yeah, of course.
Go for it.
Yeah, go for it, Ultima. There we go. Yeah, you posted it
out.
So, my thoughts are, I understand why people are reticent about Multiverse. The only time I've seen Multiverse done well is in the Netflix series Dark or in Christopher Nolan's Interstellar. And those are like the high watermarks of like really sophisticated plot writing. And none of those people are working on Remake. So like, I have no confidence that they can pull off, something that's that clever with. It's probably going to end up being, something more akin to Marvel. However, as long as they don't aggressively mess with the themes, or they use the multiverse or the alternate timeline to tell a story about the world of Final Fantasy VII that is, in line with, it doesn't have to be the same themes, but, with quality themes that you associate with Final Fantasy within the context of all of its lore, I'd still be okay with that. I wouldn't be as happy. And then if they're in the same timeline, like, I'd be pretty unsatisfied if they didn't at least make an attempt to explain how Cloud got the Buster Sword. Like, because Angeal's dad like died working himself to death to pay for that sword, and then like it got passed from Angeel to Zack, and then the whole living legacy thing is important. So, I would be really, I'd be like pretty unsatisfied if they didn't like really at least kind of make clear lines about that.
It is
not enough to hate the game though. Not enough to really, like if they nail everything else, if we get more wall markets, if we get more like dance scenes, like, or things like that, like if the Scarlet fight between Tifa and Scarlet is super epic, like, if the sum of those things are good enough, I'm not going to abandon, the quality of the game, or I'm not going to really say that the game was a failure if it doesn't tell time travel stories well, because that's not really what, like, they're never trying to tell timeline stories well. Like, that's not their thing. It doesn't matter as much to them. And as long as they keep their level of quality with detail up, I don't know. But in terms of likelihood,
style, yes, Otto. That's what we need in Final Fantasy VII Remake.
Is karaoke?
Yeah.
Works in Yakuza, right?
For sure.
Yeah. So
how about you? Okay, given all the new information you have, do you see any more hope for Remake?
Oh man, here I go, Mr. Negative. Oh god. I'm I feel like I'm branded as that, but I know you guys really want to see this go up my butt. You guys want to see the DualSense 5 or whatever go up my butt.
Wait for the PS5 controller.
Yeah.
We already know that.
Yeah. You guys want to see the PS5 controller go up there. Oh boy. I honestly do too. I really do, because I love Final Fantasy VII, and the worst thing that could happen in my perspective is that they blow the remake, right? Because I think, as I said on a previous stream, it would be, while we'll always have the original game, it would still be very upsetting to lose the opportunity of a quality remake, right? That would still be like a huge loss. Knowing everything that I know now, okay, so I think where a lot of the doubt still lingers for me is multiverse. Yeah. Multiverse. And I think it's that way for most people. And I also think when you look at a lot of the popular theories that are coming out now that people are really into, most of it is trying to explain how all this can be possible without multiple timelines, without multiverses. And so that's most people trying to explain that. And the way that I personally interpret that is that I interpret it as people are trying to find ways that it doesn't exist because they don't want the story to go in that direction. So that's kind of them on their part convincing themselves how the story will go in a way that will satisfy them.
It's a confirmation bias. Yeah. I see.
Yeah. And so people are trying to.
Is that I understand the concept of there being this looming maybe plot element that you just don't like in terms of a direction. Now, whether or not that will be handled properly, even if that is the case, is completely up to debate, right? Or like up in the air. We just don't know. But I definitely understand the angle of just not wanting to see something go in that direction because maybe the fear of it just being mishandled. And I genuinely feel that way about Zack as far as that's concerned. So like, I understand where you're coming from with that. I definitely think though that just from this conversation and just like looking at some of like the Ultimania stuff, there's definitely not any hard confirms yet. And I know that Clark's has posted a lot of information about that just during this conversation. But one of the things that I think we all kind of got roped into right off the bat when this game finally came out is that there was just the immediate theory that that's just the most believed in thing is this multiverse thing, which it's the easiest thing that would explain something right off the bat, explain the events that are happening. But right now, we just don't know if that's the case. So until that does happen, I'm still, just because of everything else that the game has shown to do right, I think that's the stuff that I believe in more than just like the multiverse thing. Because just for the ending of this game to come on so suddenly, which it did for me specifically, that's my own experience of it. I think 90% of that game proved to me that they were going to handle the rest of this well. I think, like I said before, I have my own belief about, like, just from my own theories, that it's more of a compilation integration than just, a retelling of the original story. It's more like integrating that into the original story. I think I think I'm hesitant, but I think that this is in a much better place in terms of like what hands we're in for this. So I understand where you're coming from. I just don't maybe have as much fear about the multiverse thing as, most people do. But I understand.
And so I do want to say this. Okay, so if we were to assume that Square Enix cares about continuity, which their track record isn't awesome, I will say that it is most likely that the only way to explain that Cloud is seemingly unchanged, despite Zack's survival, is that either he survives in a different timeline and we're going to see the events play out differently in another timeline where there's, a Cloud there also that, I don't know, stays beta or something like that. And that the purpose of that will ultimately be, to maybe tell parts of the meta story that are never going to be told in any other way again because the compilation is over. There's really no access. There's really no interest in redoing all of the compilation. And so he's a vehicle to retell that compilation. So there's a chance that that's what's happening. The only other possibility that makes sense, if, again, sense is what Square Enix is all about. And I hope that it is. I really do I would like there to be some cohesion here. I'm not saying that I'm okay with them just being fast and loose with facts. Is that in the month between the time we see Zack and the time we see Cloud, and it is a month, something weird happens. And I shared this dream I had with NSP, and I've shared it with Sleepezi several times. And so if what we're seeing and why Stamp looks different is because we are looking at everything through the lens of a Jenova-addled Cloud, and prior to Jenova's influence, Stamp appears as, this terrier. So something had to have happened that explains both Cloud seemingly not having any idea what's going on with Zack, Cloud having the Buster Sword, and the new Stamp. And the only thing I can think of is that something happens where Cloud goes full Jenova rage and murders Zack, steals the sword, and that's how he gets the sword. And the only reason that I would think that they might be teeing that up is how strangely murderous Cloud is in Remake as opposed to the OG. Just remorselessly attempting to kill Johnny and Reno. Mm-hmm. And throw in the weird out-of-place comment that President Shinra says about deterioration and the state it has on soldiers. It doesn't really fit with the compilation. And so they could be teeing something up like that. That would be just as satisfying to me. That being said, I think that there is hope for an alternate timeline story to satisfy, the opportunity to tell themes, and that even if it doesn't end super well, even if somehow Zack shows up at the end and dies then, or he's alive and they're both alive. Again, I really didn't care about Zack until Crisis Core. And, if the timelines end up merging, then it makes death permanent again. And your worry about, what is the meaning of death if things are alive in multiverses? One, it wouldn't be their Aerith that died. If an Aerith from another universe came, that's a different Aerith. I still would consider that lost heavy. Two, we're talking about the timelines merging. So kind of the argument of loss being meaningless would probably be, there's still a potential for that to be made permanent through whatever merging, would be inevitable with this kind of thing.
I do want to bring up, first of all, hey, Soldier First Class. I just was reading some of the comments, but I saw yours talking about the gold. Actually, one of the funny things about the concept of Remake is that the original concept of the Whispers was actually similar, it seems like, to the gold dust that we see at the end of the game, which is a really strange thing. I'm not saying that that's a confirmed, that's what the Whispers were all about, but I would just think to say that as far as what we know with the multiverse, again, there are hints of it somewhere, but for the most part, it's not. The Whispers don't necessarily confirm any of those fears yet, which is, I don't want to say that it's. Yeah, I think that it's fair to say that it's okay to see it that way, but for right now, we're not 100% sure.
Right.
It's honestly the only reasons why I haven't really talked about it is because out of all of the information that's out there on things that are relevant to like remake story. Like this whole concept of multiverse and all this other stuff has zero presence, like just absolutely no presence in the story of the compilation whatsoever. The concept of Destiny does. That's like everywhere. That's the only thing that I feel like sure about. But this multiverse thing is not, I don't know. I'm not saying that it's not possible, but I don't think that the whispers necessarily confirm that idea 100%.
And I'm also getting the sense that possibly Soldier First Class came in a little late. So
yeah, he did. He just came in.
So I think he may have missed some of our what we were talking about early on about the whispers is that that fate is sort of a secondary function of what the whispers are supposed to represent. That they're a planetary function, and that I think that the conflict between humanity and the planet is central throughout the compilation, and what that all means. There's a lot of potential to explore the themes of our relationship with the planet, and it isn't black and white. And I think that was one of the best parts about OG is it got a chance to tell a story that, like, by the end of it, the good guys and the bad guys weren't really clear. Like, is the planet good? Like, kinda, but also kind of not. Like there are no good guys, true good guys. In all of the compilation except for Genesis.
Another thing.
Wait, say Genesis is the only true good guy.
Right. My theory.
Yeah.
That he's the. It's weird that they do say that at the end of like Dirge of Cerberus that he's like the protector. Like he's gonna do something for the planet now that like Sephiroth and Angeal are gone. It's just like what? Never explained, never elaborated on. But Ultima, I think it is. Remake tells us explicitly that the whispers are the voices of the planet who are crying in pain. Yeah, Aerith at the end of Destiny's Crossroads, I think is what you're referring to. They are the desperate to free themselves from Jenova and Sephiroth. Yeah, Cloud seems to confirm that it's because of Sephiroth, but Aerith doesn't like explicitly like go into too much detail. I guess she says that like Sephiroth is not like affected by those things, which is actually where another concept of memories comes in. Is Aerith in that same line of dialogue mentions that like Sephiroth is unaffected by like these moments in memories, which seems to indicate, and also Sephiroth indicates memories as something important in the first scene that he's involved with Cloud. So there's a lot of that talk going on in Remake, oddly enough, and even Biggs brings it up. But yeah, that definitely is what seems to be happening there, from my opinion. But I don't know. Who knows?
Okay. Before we go, I want to take 3 questions from the chat. I think that's what we got time for. So if chat can go ahead and start thinking on what those 3 questions will be, we can. Yeah. Wait, what'd you say?
Can there be a quick 4th one? Because this one's easy to answer.
Is it the does Genesis come back and do just Cerberus?
That one.
Is it that one? Yeah.
He does. He's the secret ending cutscene.
Yeah.
He goes up.
Yeah.
You can look. It's glorious how bad it is. It's glorious. Check it out.
Will the mayor be the final boss? Yes.
Fantastic.
Oh. Thank you. Thank you so much for the $5 donation. Life is good 301. Greatly appreciate it. Sorry you had to deal with all that backlash, fam. Keep up the good work. Thank you so much. You're the best. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Before we get into this, is the questions is that just thanks for having us on. This is like a lot of fun.
Oh, dude. Thank you guys for coming on. Like we talked about this like from like the moment it started, and you guys have always been like on my very like top list. And so I'm very happy very, very, very happy that you guys have enjoyed your time on here. This is actually a really good question right here, by the way, from Talon134. Do you guys think the PlayStation exclusivity is the reason they couldn't make Remake M-rated even though 16 is? Maybe PlayStation begged for T so they could sell to more people.
That's something that with me.
I don't necessarily know if that tracks, right? Because
I think it's more of a Square Enix thing than a Sony thing, yeah.
Well, because right now 16 has, I think, a similar exclusivity deal, and there's blood all over the place.
Yeah.
Way to show that.
I will fully agree that that is my biggest gripe with the game is that Final Fantasy VII is supposed to be relatively dark, and the no blood thing. The rest of the compilation is pretty dark. Like if you watch the OA on the Way to a Smile, the Denzel story, like first of all, Advent Children has a bunch of dead kids. Like there's no getting around, like dead children. And then like what happens to Reeves' mom in the On the Way to a Smile Denzel episode, super brutal. So I was kind of hoping that we would get that in PS4 style, but
yeah.
I heard it had to do with China, but I have no actual information.
A lot of the time it does because they want to be able to sell to that market, and so they kind of omit blood a lot of times.
What do you think between 16 and 7 Remake?
I think that they believe that the Final Fantasy brand has this association with the teen rating. Like that's like what their standard is for the Final Fantasy brand. And I think that because even when they talked about Versus to 15, right? They talked about how Versus was in its original form too dark to be a mainline title. And so they did sort of lighten 15 up a little bit. So, in all honesty, like the way I see it is that, it's very intentional that they wanted to keep it teen rated. It's possible that Zero may have made it Z rated like automatically, which I don't know if you guys know about how Zero ratings work in Japan. I'm sure you're familiar with it though, but Zero doesn't like play at all. So Zero is like super strict. So it could have had to do with Zero. I'm not sure, but again, then you look at Final Fantasy 16, and then it's like they just were like, yeah, nah.
Yeah.
But 16 also, I feel like 16 more heavily is aimed at the Western audience than any Final Fantasy we've seen in a minute. Maybe 15, but I feel like this is even more aimed at Western audiences than before. But it's also because the Western audience is bigger. Like there's more consoles here, and we buy more games on those consoles. So it's really like it's somewhere in between. So, but I'm very happy with the direction that 16 is going in, and 16 is like probably one of my most anticipated games, at least from Square Enix. It's my like number one anticipated. Actually, I take that back. Nier Replicant is my number one anticipated game from Square Enix. Nier
Replicant looks so clutch.
I'm
man. Really glad I woke up early to watch that.
Amazing. I'm like day one for me. Day zero, dude. Fucking see if Square won't send me a review code for that.
I got in that way when I saw that rock drop on like one of the soldiers in Final Fantasy 16. I was like, this is radical for me.
And he ripped a guy apart.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And the weird fire skeleton I'm about it.
It looks awesome. Very like dark and gritty. And I was just like, this is exactly the answer to like where like, I don't know, this position needed to be filled. Like if we're going to be getting Final Fantasy VII Remake and it's leaning more into like the whimsical, I was like, just go with something completely different. And it just feels like that's where this is going. So I'm very happy. And I'm also glad about the combat, which they seem to have solved some aerial combat like right away. So
yeah.
Exciting.
Which honestly, like, well, of course 7R didn't do aerial combat that well. 15 honestly did not either. Like, it was not the greatest. It didn't feel comfortable. 16, like, man, there's some like really good like
looks like DMC.
happening.
It looks like Devil May Cry.
Yeah, and if they can just incorporate party members into that, I'm sold.
Yeah, I would. I hope, and it's too early to tell. I do hope that there is some more representation in the game. I know that's like an uncommon complaint, but it is one for me. So I do hope we get to see some diversity in the characters, which I think we probably will.
Yeah, please put some waifus in there, please.
Yoshi P is really good about that. He said some a lot of statements I personally agree with. So,
okay, can we get question number 2? Oh, I see someone saying that they have a good one. Oh, okay. How do you think they will end the upcoming series? Let's start over. First of all, Jack Example Esquire, thank you for the Prime sub. Chef of Dev asks, how do you think they'll end the upcoming series in the remakes, or the upcoming entries in the remake series? They can't just throw a Sephiroth fight at the end of each one, but they've set the precedents now with the first game. The answer is Genesis.
I just wish.
Oh,
like on a high note. Why don't you? You know?
Yeah.
Everybody wanted.
So, do you want to go first?
No, go. I actually have to think about that.
So let's say they end somehow with Aerith's death, which is bold. Like, that's a long game. If they end with Aerith's death, if in game 2, just finding Jenova again with Aerith's theme song in the background would be a super Empire Strikes Back way to end the game, and I'd be okay with that. Also, and this is absurd and probably not going to happen, but if it happens, I get all the credit. If the weird, if they're setting Cloud up to be this villain, Cloud would be a really good final villain in, Cloud, Jenova controlled Cloud would be a good final villain in part 2. Sephiroth, I think, has to be the final villain. And, I see that there's potential for his redemption, and that, the Watashi Ori Sephiroth, like there is potential that, they're giving him a redemption, and he is a real tragic story if you think about it. But I really don't think they're going to deviate from him ultimately taking control and killing the last Cetra. Like, even if it was to please his mother, he killed Aerith, and him being the final boss fight, I think, is a slam dunk for them in the third game. So that would be, I think, probably it. Or Zirconiad.
Zirconiad, definitely. I think that this might sound like a very underwhelming answer, and it's the one that I kind of have stuck with since the beginning, is that I really just think that we're going to get Safer Sephiroth as the final boss of like the series. I think that he perfectly fits like the context of like this new remake, just as much as he did in OG, but I think like in a better context. I think that definitely Aerith dying is a good place to leave off the sequel of games. And Jean Garcia, yes, Minerva would be a great like side boss or something, just like she was in Crisis Core. Just
Sapphire Weapon.
Huh. What?
I'm saying I hope we fight the Sapphire Weapon.
Yeah, Sapphire Weapon would be great. I think that what would be a really fun thing to do is get Lucrezia as a boss. I think she should be infected by Jenova cells. That would be a fun side in story, because she doesn't do much else for the plot. Just have everybody have the glory of just ending a character that hasn't really done too much. She also has very little like lore relevance. She does have lore relevance. I should say that she does, but the explanation for her is like completely like, it's like the biggest screw loose on the compilation that I can find. is trying to find out like how any of that works. So it would just be fun to have her be a boss.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, let's see. Last question. Actually, Mugen Head Ninja had an interesting one. Do you think Vice and Nero will be important characters in the remake?
No.
No. I think they might get references the way that Azul got reference.
Yeah, that's kind of what I think too.
You have a white-haired kid in remake that has no explanation.
No. We've been over this. No,
it's a terrible idea.
He thinks Chadley might be Vice, and he's wrong.
They both have their abilities, but it's a very like loose theory. I think that all I would want to see out of that is what we've already seen kind of in remake part 1, which is just a nod to them would be great. I think that's all we need. I think if you want to acknowledge DOC at any point, that's the win, because most of that lore has, a lot of fun elements that you could just tip your hat to in future titles.
It's a bummer that DOC had such good lore presented in the absolute trash factory package that it was presented in.
Not a good, and by many people's standards. And I would even argue that some of the lore can get like really infuriating, but I'd say it would just be nice to see any more compilation. Honestly, like the one game I want to see mostly represented is Before Crisis. I think there's a lot of stuff you can do with like the Turks from that story, Avalanche. I think that's like literally like the most excited thing that I am for a remake. And it's already set up with Avalanche being more prominent in the story. I think that like that's fully set up to happen. And like leaders of Avalanche and all that other stuff would be a great thing to highlight for sure.
That was my thinking too, especially before remake came out. That was like the number one thing that I really wanted to see. I'll actually end off on this question right here from Life is Good 301. Now that I think of it, won't it be hard to portray dying suicide or other moments in later game to be T-rated?
Yes.
Yeah, probably so.
And Sid's behavior will not age well.
Not at all. Yeah, you can't really show Sid as he was in 2020. Not without getting canceled.
Yeah. Maybe that's why they are making him into a hub.
Who knows, right? Who knows? That's what the rumor on the grapevine says. But all right. This has been one hell of a stream, you guys. Like, this has been amazing. My eyes right now are so open. I'm like fucking.
They're about as open as that butthole's going to be for that DualSense later.
Yeah. This is my third eye, and then this is me after the dual. This is after the DualSense, man. I'm just gonna.
I do being a good sport about all of that.
I do want to say too that I not only appreciate you having us on, just for the purpose of more representation of alternate viewpoints, but I do want you to know that I've been betrayed by a lot of my favorite stuff before, and I do have actual empathy for you, even though we like have different we've drawn different conclusions. Like that sucks if you really love something and it doesn't deliver.
Yeah.
So I do have empathy for that, and so I get what you're saying, and I don't foresee you inserting that DualSense, if I'm being totally serious, and that's a bummer. But as a longtime member of the Final Fantasy community, I think what you've done for it is priceless. And so thank you very much. And even if we don't agree, I'm still a supporter.
You guys have definitely enlightened me. This has been one of the best conversations that I've had in a good minute, honestly. Learned so much about the lore of this franchise, and I just want to let you guys know we're gonna keep doing these. We're gonna keep doing these about 7R. We're gonna keep doing these about Final Fantasy 16. We're gonna be doing these about other JRPGs. You guys know I love Nier. You guys know I love Persona. You guys know I love just like a whole bunch of other JRPGs, and so yeah, we're gonna keep these coming. We're going to, in all these 7R discussions, we're gonna have very very diverse opinions, and so I mean honestly, yeah, dude. People out there, some people say I'm negative Nancy, but I may be a negative Nancy in this situation, but I just want to say. You cannot say that I haven't listened to all sides of the court. That's been my primary objective, is to
video proof now.
Yeah. I want to hear everyone in the community. Honestly, this has been like one of the most mind-blowing conversations, because now I know so much more about this and going into it, and it does shift my perspective a little bit more. So yeah, I mean, let's keep doing these, you guys. I fucking love it. You guys really you guys are honestly just the greatest community. I love all of you so much. So
one last plug for Auto Ignition, who's been in the chat. I think Sleepezi and I both give her strong recommendations. And as a matter of fact, after this stream, we are going to all three be chatting over on my channel. So feel free to join us, guys.
Oh, okay. Awesome.
So it's like an unwind sort of thing for the night. But I'd like to second everything that Clark just said. And I'd just really like to thank everybody for coming out and supporting this conversation. It's been really awesome, and I had a great time. So thank you for allowing this to happen, NSP.
Anytime, man. Anytime. If you ever want to come back, I'm sure we'll probably actually. It'll be a great time to have a discussion again, like once we know some more major details. I'd love to have you back after that new Ultimania comes out. That's
absolutely.
That's gonna be.
Yeah, we have our team of translators standing by.
That's gonna be like the real enlightening conversation, because I feel like whatever, like there's gonna be something big in that new Ultimania.
Yeah, definitely.
They gotta throw us a bone at this point, so yeah, there better be.
They have to. Okay, you guys, y'all know what time it is. It's time to raid. Before we do that, let's say goodbye to the YouTube audience. So if you're watching this on YouTube, bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Bye.